Good afternoon, and welcome to our second in a series of uncomfortable conversations. My name is Deborah Rose, and I'm the president and CEO of the North San Diego Business Chamber. And back in, I'm going to say probably February or March, our board had made a conscious decision to start dialogue and host these uncomfortable conversations and keep the dialogue going so that we could really showcase the importance of the movement that we've seen happening over the last 6 or 7 months. Today is the second in a series, and we're really excited to bring to you a panel of leaders that are going to share with us what they're doing within their companies. Today, the program will last about an hour and 25 minutes. The first hour will be a panel dialogue on how do you start these conversations? How do you start change within your organization when it comes to diversity, inclusion, and equity? And then also the last 20 to 25 minutes, we're going to open it up for our attendees to ask questions of the panelists. I did have an interesting conversation with someone this week that said, gosh, I know that you have the area on the Zoom where we can ask questions, but what happens if we want to ask a question anonymously and we don't want everybody to see where it's coming from? We have a solution for that. If you write down this phone number, you can text your question to me. That question will be copied and pasted and sent over to the moderator, so it can be asked anonymously, and that information will not be shared where it came from. That phone number that you can text it to is 858-922-1766. That is my personal phone number, my personal cell phone number, and Brianna has posted that in the chat. So feel free to text me if you have any questions anytime throughout this uncomfortable conversation, and we will make sure that it gets to the moderator. We're really excited today to bring you good topic, good information, and I'm really excited to introduce you to our moderator, who is one of my board members, and this is really important to her, and she's got a lot of background in it. So please join me on screen, Lisa. Lisa Peterson is the executive director for the San Diego Zoo Safari Park. And not only does she have great relationships with the animals, but she has great relationships with her team and our colleagues as well. And this is a conversation that they have all the time. So without further ado, Lisa, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thanks, Deborah. So I'm so grateful to you for inviting me to help with this conversation. It's always been important, but it's become really, really urgent in the last few months. And our industry we've struggled with creating really meaningful progress. And so I'm excited to have the conversations. I'm excited to talk about what we can do. It sometimes feels uncomfortable. We're not sure the questions to ask. We're not sure of how to ask them the right way. But I think when we ask heartfelt questions and we build a collective that we can talk to, it really will help us to drive this forward. And there's really nothing more important, I think, from a diversity standpoint than us starting this conversation and really making meaningful change. Today, we're going to talk a little bit about how we approach our employers, our boss, our organizations, our HR department, or whoever might be leading that. And then also talking about how we engage and how we activate a more diverse talent in each of our work groups. So I would love to introduce you to our panel. With us today, we have Dawn Andrews, who is Director of Diversity and Inclusion at SDG&E. Brittany Torres, who is a shareholder at Littler. Glenn Williams, who's the Senior Director of Global Inclusion and Diversity at Qualcomm. Lee Wills, who is the Head of Talent Acquisition and Culture at Sony Electronics. And Vicki Zine, who is the owner and Chief Culture and Community Advocate for AleSmith Brewing. So welcome to you guys. Before we get started, I would love to ask each of you to tell us a little bit about your experience and your role in your organization. So Dawn, can we kick it off with you?
Sure. Thank you for having me. I'm really happy to be here and to see all of you and to be on this panel with all of my esteemed colleagues here today. Yesterday, I actually started in a new role at SDG&E as the Assistant General Counsel, I'm still getting familiar with it, of Ethics and Workplace Culture. Prior to that, I was SEMPRA's Director of Diversity and Inclusion for 2.5 years, and prior to that, I was a labor and employment lawyer. So I bring that experience to my work in diversity and inclusion, and now focused on workplace culture as it pertains to ethics.
That's fantastic. Thanks, Dawn. Brittany, could you tell us a little bit about your role?
Absolutely. Thank you, Lisa. I'm a shareholder with Littler Mendelson, which is the world's largest labor and employment law firm. I focus my practice on diversity and inclusion. It is a broad umbrella. There are a lot of different subspecialties within it. Part of that is training and coaching organizations, workforces, leadership on concepts like respectful workplaces, unconscious bias, and generally diversity and inclusion. I also consult with regarding the legal framework on how to achieve various diversity and inclusion initiatives. And we also have a D&I audit practice where we use data to get a really deep understanding of workforces that can be used as the basis for very targeted diversity and inclusion initiatives.
Wow, that's amazing. I can't wait to hear how you handle some of our questions today. Thank you. Glenn Williams, would you tell us a little bit about you?
Yeah, so similar to the last two panelists, I'm a lawyer. So I actually started out in financial services before I moved over into working more on the D&I side, particularly in compliance. Before I worked at Qualcomm, I held leadership positions in D&I in both ExxonMobil as well as Amazon. And then in my role here at Qualcomm, I oversee our global inclusion and diversity program, and that's broken up into a few sections. So compliance, which is a big piece, making sure that we're following EEOC guidance or FCCP guidance, as well as we have a development section. So all of our D&I trainings are required trainings, making sure that our leaders are trained effectively. Recruiting, so bringing our next generation of leaders to Qualcomm, making sure that they're diverse, as well as the employee networks, which we have 9, and we oversee those. And lastly, our conferences and events. Yeah.
Again, amazing experiences to share with all of us today. Thanks so much. Lee, would you tell us a little bit about your role?
Hi, Lisa. Absolutely. Great to be here with everyone today. So in my role, I lead talent acquisition for Sony as well as inclusion for the organization. So really finding and bringing in great talent to Sony and continuing to foster a great and inclusive workplace, including engagement, inclusion, employee networks, all the things that really make an inclusive workplace where employees can bring their whole selves and are supported with feedback for professional development. Not an attorney.
That's fantastic. Thanks so much, Lee. And then last, but certainly not least, Vicki, can you tell us a little bit about your role? You have a really interesting title and role in your organization.
Well, I'm very fortunate to be in my position because my husband and I are the owners of Ale Smith Brewing Company. And I just want to say I'm honored and humbled to be on this panel with all these great people. So as I'm hearing everybody introduce themselves, I'm just thinking about us as a small family-owned business with 70 employees. And I'm looking to learn something from all of you as well. But my role is, as owner, chief culture and community advocate, is really to oversee HR and culture at a high level, but also that community outreach. I've always been the one to reach out to other nonprofits to bring them in, host their fundraisers, help them raise money, but also partner with some of them on an ongoing basis. For example, the Lost Boys of Sudan, which we've partnered with, and host many fundraisers for them. And this is a group of refugees from Sudan, Africa, who send money back home and try to help with education. but I'm also founder and president of our own very new nonprofit, Amble of Hope. We just received our 501c3 this year during the pandemic, of course, but we have a goal to strengthen our community by helping at-risk youth and low-income families thrive.
That's fantastic. Congratulations on that.
Thank you.
That's really terrific. Okay, so let's jump in. How do we, and I'll just ask whoever sort of moved to answer the question, if we can just start there, and really the goal would be to have really robust and rich dialogue around anything that moves you or anything that you'd like to add to. So how do we start the conversation, right? Having a discussion with our employer, especially maybe if we're not in positions like some of you guys on the panel, it can be really difficult. So give us an idea of what's a good way of approaching your manager with maybe concerns or ideas that you have around DEAI.
You know, Lisa, I'll start off because I wanted to actually add on to what Vicki said a few moments ago. And she brought up corporate social responsibility and giving back to the community and the roles that we play as organizations and businesses in the community and what we do to partner with nonprofits. And that's such an important point and opportunity. And I think it also provides a gateway to engage in conversation about what's meaningful to you and what's meaningful to an organization from a corporate social responsibility standpoint. And there is a definite nexus between CSR and diversity and inclusion. So I think that's a really great place to start, just one of many, but I really wanted to bring that home, that it is an opportunity that we can all seize.
Absolutely. Anybody else have thoughts on that question, on how you might approach it or what you think is really important?
I'll speak to that a little bit, Lisa. I think that there are different approaches you can take, and perhaps the lowest risk approach would be a completely anonymous reach out. Every year we provide an employee engagement survey for employees to solicit their feedback on a number of topics, including several dimensions of diversity. And there's a free response question at the very end of the survey. We ask two questions. One, what do you like most about this place? And two, what do you like least about this place? What should we change? And we read through every one of the thousands of responses we get there, and it's a place where we receive a lot of really good ideas from employees. So that's a very low risk way. A higher risk way, if you have the relationships and you have the confidence to do it, and you have psychological safety in your organization, would be to reach out to a leader that you think may have a sympathetic ear. Express what you're looking for and the ways that you see the organization not currently providing it. Now, what you might hear if you don't do your due diligence is we already have employee resource groups like the great ones that Sony and Qualcomm currently have, or we already have other volunteer opportunities or organizations. At Sempra and the family of companies, we have local diversity and inclusion councils at 14 geographic locations. We have a central employee diversity and inclusion council. So the first thing that I would say if someone came to me out of thin air is, have you gotten involved in one of those groups? You can shape our policy that way. But if you don't have those, if you work at a smaller employer, I think finding an ally in leadership is a great way to get started. And if you're not getting a sympathetic ear, I would educate yourself on the business case for diversity, equity, and inclusion, and make sure that your organization understands the direct links between productivity and employee engagement, inclusivity, and diversity in your workforce. So a few ideas there.
Yeah, those are amazing ideas. I think diversity, that productivity approach, I think is super important. If other things aren't as obvious, that gives a great way for it to make sense for everyone. So anybody else have thoughts on that?
The only thing that I'll do, I'll add just a little bit to what Dawn said. I think that she really kind of covered most of the ways how you would how you would start the conversation. With the employee networks or with the employee resource groups, they can also be kind of a strength in numbers play. So a lot of times with our ERGs, they will work together to kind of come up with a group of suggestions or feedback to give to our senior leaders or their executive sponsors to say, these are some of the issues that we have seen in our organization that we think could be changed. We also like to have forums where we'll have senior leaders kind of listen to some of our employee resource groups. And that has been a great way to really exact change if those people would have made the suggestions just one by one, maybe they wouldn't have had the same force as having a group of people kind of signing off saying that we all want to move forward together.
Can I ask a follow-up question? I think
Yes.
maybe to Dawn and to you, Glenn, and maybe to you too, as Lee, is if you get those suggestions through maybe an anonymous channel, and that's the most comfortable way for somebody, is there a way that you then re-communicate that back out so that you're not breaking that confidence, but you're also letting that person know that they were heard or that changes are being made? So is there a follow-up loop on what you do when you get those types of suggestions?
But at least I'll leave. Go ahead, Lee.
Well, I had 2 points. One is related to employee networks or employee resource groups. And I wanted to just be really clear that employee networks are meant to be inclusive organizations. So although they maybe have formed for one specific demographic, they're really about bringing people in and providing relationships and networking and opportunity and education. So you don't have to be a member of a specific demographic group to be part of that group. Really, everyone encourage allies and people to join. So I wanted to make that point clear. And then the second piece to your question related to following up with an anonymous suggestions and recommendations. We also have an employee survey that we send out every year, and we take the feedback that we get from that extremely seriously and look at all of the comments to try and understand what may be opportunities and things that we can address as an organization. And we report out on that survey as well. So if it's anonymous, it's difficult to go back to this person individually, but we definitely take feedback very seriously and do report back to employees. And if you ask questions on a survey, you've got to respond and let people know what you're doing to address those issues that were brought forward.
Absolutely. Glenn, were you going to add something?
I think that actually Lee kind of covered the main point. Is we do something very similar. So if if we get feedback from our survey, then we actually address it. We actually have an all hands where we address a lot of the issues that come up. If it is sent through our employee relations as anonymous, it really depends. If it's a pure anonymous, then it's kind of hard because it could be very specific to that person. If it's part of an investigation and the person just doesn't want their information out, then whichever HR professional who has kind of started that investigation will then report back out to that person. But maybe not everybody else knows who that person is. So those are kind of the 2 ways that I've seen the anonymous feedback come in.
Thanks, you guys. What about implementing change when we're talking about our coworkers? Any ideas on how to share how others can help implement change into the culture without really offending anyone or maybe appearing overly aggressive?
I can talk about that.
Okay.
And I feel very fortunate that we're owners and we get to do what we think is best for everyone, just because our employees know that we really care about them and we feel like we get to do cool stuff. Nobody can stop us really, and we get employee input. So we're in that nice position. But I'm Hispanic, my husband's Jewish, so we grew up hearing racial slurs. So we're, I think, more sensitive than others, but we live and breathe diversity and inclusion every day. I mean, everything that we do, our employees can see we're very transparent. I mean, everything from working together with the Lost Boys of Sudan, but hosting World Peace Day. We celebrate various holidays, including Hanukkah and Jackie Robinson Day, Tony Gwynn Day. We created a shirt that says peace, love, equality, and beer, and we're donating proceeds to Paving Great Futures. So we feel like we get to do a lot of cool stuff, and we get input from our employees. We create various committees where they can feel more comfortable speaking to their peers. On day one of new hire orientation, we let them know your voice as important to us on day one as it is on year 10. So we're living and breathing that every day. So we feel fortunate that we have a very open door policy and a comfortable environment for employees to come and speak to us and share their voices with us and through committees.
I love that. That is such a, I think there's a compliance piece to this for all of us, but I also am very interested and intrigued by the commitment idea and being able to move off of, because you're so committed, it isn't about being compliant anymore. It's about the commitment to it. And it sounds like that's exactly where you and your team are, Vicki, and that inspires me as a leader. So.
Absolutely. Yeah, that is so exciting to have the leadership and the ownership of the organization with such buy-in like Vicki was explaining. And absolutely that is something to encourage and to foster. Even if you don't have the same leadership or ownership with the demonstrated commitment to diversity and inclusion, you can absolutely approach these difficult conversations in a very productive way. You can show how difficult conversations can be had, and you can also interrupt negative interactions, biases that you might see bubbling up. They can be addressed and they can be handled in a very productive way. It just requires a level of intentionality in how you might act, understanding who you're talking with, whether it's the appropriate situation, and how to positively address it. So even though it might be a negative that you're observing or commenting on or trying to steer away from, you can still do it in a very positive way. For example, asking questions, using I statements, trying to avoid making the other person feel defensive and closed off, but showing how you can have this respectful but very difficult conversation.
Oh, Lisa, I just wanted to add to what Brittany said, because something she'd said was, one, intention. So having a positive intent when you approach the situation. And secondly, key to having a conversation is being willing to listen, right? So really asking those questions and hearing what someone has to say and to share without judgment, and just recognizing and opening up that two-way communication so they know that you are there and available and listening and care enough to ask.
Great point, Lee. Really great point, and Brittany as well. Any other thoughts on that, you guys, before we move on to another question? Okay. How do we foster inclusiveness without showing a perceived bias? Any suggestions or ideas around that?
That's definitely a tricky one. Bias is a hot spot. Certainly is on the forefront of everyone's mind, and I think rightfully so. It's not about labeling as bad because we have a bias. Everyone has bias. It's the way that our brains work, and just acknowledging that fact so that we can remove the stigma and blame and instead transition to more productive conversations of identifying within yourself and even within others. When am I acting based on information and facts that are before me? And when am I reacting because of an assumption, a previous experience, something that has become ingrained as a bias? And when you can identify that in yourself, it helps you identify it in others. And then also to move away from the stigma and from the blame and instead into just how do we move forward? How do we address this in a respectful way so that everyone's being heard? We feel like we have a common ground on an understanding. We don't have to agree about everything. We can all have different experiences and opinions, but we can be respectful in the way that we engage with those considerations.
Yeah. Yeah, no, just to kind of to build off of that, part of my job, sometimes I actually do training, and as I said, one of the the areas underneath my purview is our development. And a lot of times when we go out and we give training about some of the programs that we have or some of our AAP goals, affirmative action plan goals, you know, we do kind of get this pushback sometimes. It's like, well, why are you favoring this group or that group? What's going on? Like, what's the problem here? So the first thing I like to do is I like to listen, right? You know, even if I completely disagree with what they're saying, I want to hear where they're coming from, and I want them to understand that I'm listening to what they have to, you know, to say, right? And then I start to try to educate them, you know, so I let them know that this isn't about showing favoritism. You know, what this is about getting to equity for all people, you know, making sure that the women in our organizations are given the same opportunity that men are given, and that people of color are given the same opportunity as some of the more overrepresented groups in business. And then normally after that, we'll have a conversation, and we'll also talk about some of the outcomes that we're looking for. So just really allowing them to understand what our goals are, how we came up with them, why we actually have the goals. And a lot of times that changes some viewpoints. Not everybody, and this isn't a sprint. So sometimes you got to have multiple conversations with people to get them, you know, to get them to really understand. But I would say that the biggest part is really hearing, listening, and kind of understanding where they're coming from, and then giving them the facts of the situation.
Yeah, Lisa, I would also add, and I appreciate Glenn's point too, because diversity, equity, and inclusion are three different things. Diversity is a diverse representation of people from all backgrounds, but it's also diversity. It's a continuum. How you think, your socioeconomic status, your educational institution, how long you've been at the organization. So there's all these different things that make up diversity. And equity is really about putting systems and processes in place that ensure equitable treatment for people within the organization, and to make sure that you've got standardized processes and that people have the opportunity to be successful in your organization. Sort of what Glenn talked about a little while ago, looking at your representation of women and people of color throughout the organization. And then inclusion is really making sure that it's an inclusive environment where everyone is successful and has an opportunity to be successful, no matter what their background, no matter what their level of experience, and creating that sense of belonging. And that really comes from common goals, shared cultures as a company culture. So three different things: diversity, equity, and inclusion. And it's important to be able to differentiate those, because you'll address solving those in different ways as well.
That's such a good point. I think when we think about it, it's sort of, we say the letters together, but you're absolutely right. It's very, very different. And your approach and the solve and the work together is different for each. One thing that we've been focusing on here, so I'm on the DEAI work group committee for AZA, which is the accrediting body. And so it's been interesting to sort of navigate this as a collective across a type of industry. But we've been really working here at the park about responding and not reacting. And so as we're approaching this and we're working with different thought partners, it's really important. It's very easy to react. It's a lot more challenging to respond. And so really taking in some of the listening, some of the things that you guys have all mentioned, really, really being in that space. And it's hard because a lot of times we have these ideas and we're just trying to get through, and it takes a second to respond and not react to what you're hearing. And that's just good advice, I think, in general, especially during times of great stress. So how do we, so we talked a little bit about how do we approach maybe our managers, our leaders, our organization about this topic, but then how do we, I'd like to shift gears into how do we find diverse talent and how do we create this diverse workforce? And so how do you attract folks that are underrepresented in your organizations? What's your process and any best practices that you have?
I can share something. I mean, we feel very fortunate to have a diverse group of people. We use a variety of different sites, of course, and even temp agencies to get a diverse group. But we have all the pictures of all of our employees on our website, which everybody can view. So people who are visiting our site, they get to see that, you know what, hey, they hire a diverse group of people, so they start feeling welcomed right away. And not only that, but people have come to visit our brewery and they say, wow, this is the most diverse brewery I've ever seen. We won an award in our industry, something I'd never heard of, but the Aki Awards. We won the Aki Awards for the most diverse and inclusive brewery in San Diego. So people see things like that. They hear about the partnership with the Lost Boys of Sudan and various events that we do involving the community. So when we are interviewing candidates, they tell us, wow, we hear about all the things that you're doing for the community and how open you guys are. So we feel like we're attracting the right people to begin with.
That's such an amazing idea, to be able to, for people to be able to see themselves in that space. And that's such an easy way to do it before they ever engage. I think I love that idea. Any other thoughts on that?
I can add to that. I think that it's a really complicated question in some ways. How do you attract a diverse workforce? And I think that employers, especially employers of the size of Qualcomm and Sempra and Sony, have to really look at it from multiple angles. So we have to look at, are we an employer of choice? Are we implementing and sustaining policies that attract not just the current workforce, but future workforces? So are we offering paid parental leave? Qualcomm, for example, has a fabulous paid parental leave program that doesn't just extend to parents, it extends to kin care. That is a very appealing benefit, especially for millennials and Gen Z. And that's, I think, what we have to focus on in terms of policy. When you look at the workforce in general, you have to look down into the pipe. You really have to look all the way down into every potential feeder pool of employees. So partnerships with elementary schools, with middle schools, with high schools, so that you can start educating the workforces of the future about what you do and why this is the place to be. Why should they choose Sony over Qualcomm? Why should they choose tech over energy? Should they work in either? Or should they work in the nonprofit space or in a smaller business like the awesome place that Vicki owns? How do you differentiate yourself? And then how do you use your existing workforce to help bring up future generations of employees? And then the question becomes, how do you reach out to people? Have you really debiased your selection processes so that you're bringing in a diverse set of employees? Are you using language neutralizing tools when you create job descriptions and you advertise your jobs and when you go out on recruiting missions, so that what you're putting out there attracts a diverse set of people who are qualified and interested? And there is so much research done that shows that when you do things like that, you attract not just a more diverse workforce, but a much more qualified workforce. Our workforce as a nation, our employers as a nation, still suffer from a tremendous amount of familiarity bias. So much of whether you succeed in this country is based on who you know. And it really shouldn't be that way. That's not best for business, but we all kind of tolerate it, I think, because it's kind of a norm. And then when you bring candidates in the door, how are you choosing who comes through the door? Are you using blind resume review? Are you setting up diverse panels of interviewers? Do you have a diverse panel of interviewees? How are you scoring those applicants so that you're making selections that are truly fair? And I think that most organizations in this country are not doing all of those things. I would say none of them are. I'll just put that out there. But I think that's where we point our arrow. That's what we should be headed toward. And as D&I professionals, I think our job is to push our organizations in that direction. And Vicki, in your shoes, you're really lucky because you could just make that happen today.
Yes.
And I think Glenn and Lee and I are really jealous of that because we are pushing the Titanic uphill sometimes barefoot through the snow. So, so keep up the good work.
Thank you.
I have to say, I think Dawn did a great job of capturing all of the elements, and some of the things that she described go specifically to that equity piece, right? What are those systems and processes that you have in place to ensure equity? Also, the piece about, are you a best place to work? You know, making sure that what you're putting out on the street in your marketing materials is authentic. Do you have those great benefits? I know we've been really focused on making sure that we've got benefits that are appropriate for working families as well. So what are the benefits that you're highlighting and sharing about your best place to work? And then lastly is, you know, knowing where you are as an organization. What are your areas of opportunity? Is it to hire more women in engineering? What are your numbers? So being really just cognizant of what are you trying to do? What are you doing as an organization? And then getting that out there and being willing to make change, because this is a change process. It's not something that happens automatically or organically.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with that, Lee. And that was going to be the point that I was also going to highlight in particular. I agree with everything that Dawn said. I agree with everything that Lee said. But to me, where I start at is you have to get the buy-in from your senior leadership, because if they actually don't believe that this is possible, then it's not going to work. I know before I left my previous company to come to Qualcomm, I had a conversation with some of the senior leaders, and I said, am I going to be supported in what I need to do? I laid out the type of things that I wanted to get done, and I was very upfront and honest. And I said, I need support for all of these things. Am I going to get that support? And fortunately, like for me, you know, management has said that they will support me, and they've actually been great in living up to that. So you really have to have that buy-in to say, we're going to make the changes, as Lee said, the changes necessary, and we're going to be supportive of some of these actions, because some of this stuff is not easy. You know, going to leaders and saying, guess what? We're going to slow down the recruiting process because we want to have diverse slates. And they're like, wait, no, hold on. I need this job filled like yesterday. Like that's what I need. I don't need to slow anything down. I got this guy and he's awesome, and I don't want to interview anybody else. It's like, but you're going to. So sorry about that, but this is going to work, and in the end, it's going to be better for not only the organization but for your team as well. So having that buy-in is good. Well, another thing that I also like to highlight, and this has been something that's been really successful for us, is when I came to this company and some of the former companies that I worked for, they had a cookie cutter way of kind of defining what was a good employee. This is how a good employee looks. This is where a good employee went to school at, and this is our definition of a good employee. So one of the first things I did, I looked at the data and looked at the people who went to the schools that they said that the perfect employees came from, and then I looked at the schools that they said the perfect employees did come from, and you know, lo and behold, they actually progressed at about the same rate. They got promoted at about the same rate, and it was like, are we sure that we should be saying that these are the only people who can do this job, right? So with that data in hand, we started to actually talk about some alternate pathways. Now we have a returnship program. Now we have a hiring heroes program where we actually get veterans to come in and work for Qualcomm. Those type of things, if you get the buy-in from your company or from your organization, they can really go a long way into diversifying your company.
Are going to be hiring actually a director for San Diego Zoo Global. I'm super excited. It has the backing all the way up to our CEO, so that we can improve. So I'm very excited. You're right. I love your comment, Glenn, about it being a marathon. It is. This isn't about, you know, snapping our fingers and making it so. But I think that buy-in at the highest levels is very, very important, so that our team understands the direction, appreciates and respects the direction, and so that as we're changing and it's uncomfortable, that person has the support that needs to happen to go along with it. So how do you guys minimize the potential for bias in candidate screening? Do you do things like maybe remove names from resumes? maybe some kind of assessment tools or diverse panels. So what are one of the recommendations you would make to take those biases out?
So Dawn actually laid out a lot of these. One of the things that we're doing within Sony, our diverse interview teams, there's a lot of levers to pull. So you need to figure out how to implement those in your organizations, but all of those can be really effective strategies in order to diversify the candidate pool. And just looking for a wider reach when you're casting the net for candidates and really sourcing more broadly rather than those usual schools, as Glenn talked about a little while ago. And also being open to culture ads. So often organizations are looking for culture fit, but how do you find a culture ad to bring into your organization?
I love that.
I just want to add one other thing that I wanted to mention in the prior question, and that is I think employers need to take a look at whether jobs, especially entry-level jobs, really require a college degree. College degrees are barriers for people of color more often than for people who are not people of color. And so I think when you sit and look, and I think this is kind of what Glenn's alluding to in the work that he did analyzing educational background, you can find some incredible performers who don't have that piece of paper on the wall. And we all know people who have the piece of paper who are really unremarkable. So I think take a look at that, because you might really be missing out on some candidates that could add a great diversity of perspective for your organization. Similar with criminal background. We know that our criminal justice system is completely biased. And if you accept that to be true, and studies have shown that it is, you have to take a look at what you can do as an organization to make sure that you're not missing out on great candidates simply because they may have fallen victim to our unfair criminal justice system. So 2 other thoughts.
Yeah, Don is so I'm sorry, Brittany, were you about to talk? Sorry.
No, go for it. I'll jump in after.
No, I was just going to say, Don is so correct in this. This is one of the things that I'm still working with Qualcomm to kind of get over that hump. And I know SDG&E has done a really great job of ensuring that if you're a great candidate, whether you have a college degree or not, you can come on board. For Qualcomm, we still are kind of stuck in that a little bit. If you want to be an engineer, you have to have a degree. I've looked at other companies where people have literally went to coding boot camps and they have risen to, senior level in top tech companies, Amazon, Google, Facebook, and they don't have a college. Mark Zuckerberg, as far as I know, still doesn't have a college degree, right? And he's one of the richest people in the world. Yeah. So you have to say, like, okay, are we really looking at the right things? But just real quick, just to answer your question about some of the things that we do to ensure to take bias out of the interview process. Is one, we have a software that makes all the resumes look very similar. So you're not looking at the way they wrote the resumes, because we've seen that like if you have a very pretty resume or a very nice looking resume, then that one goes to the top a little bit more. So everybody kind of sees the resume in the exact same way. And then also on top of that, before we send any of our teams out to like any type of hiring event, they actually go through training that we call inclusive hiring, where we remind them of some of the things that they should be looking for when they're going through resume reviews, as well as when they're writing job descriptions. We kind of also give them training to do that as well.
Yeah, we also provide interviewer training for managers and people in the hiring process. The other thing I wanted to add, in addition to, really determining is a college degree required, is COVID has taught us that people can work remotely. You do not have to be physically in an environment. So far, we've all managed to be very productive. And I think we have to be much more open to the idea of remote work and being willing to recruit from places where maybe we wouldn't have before.
Great point.
Absolutely. Just some high-level concepts about bias in general. A lot of the bias that we're dealing with is unconscious. So just identifying it is a task in and of itself. And it really does require us to slow down, be deliberate, be critical about the systems and processes in place. Identify when you're doing something just because somebody else did it that way for 5 years, when there's opportunity for improvement, how you might approach that, so that you really can first identify that bias and then think critically about how we can change the process or the procedure or the policy. And really just, again, you got to slow it down. As Glenn alluded to, so often in the workplace, we are dealing with time constraints and stress and deadlines. All of that speeds up our cognitive thinking so that we end up acting and reacting based on the emotional reptilian side of our brain. We have to actively engage our critical thinking muscles in order to be deliberate about this. So it might feel like you're pressed for time and that getting something checked off your checklist is a priority. And it absolutely is an undertaking to try to think critically and improve various processes. But ultimately, when you start getting in the habit of being more critical about your thought processes and your decisions, ultimately that's the trend that's going to become easier, and hopefully you'll be able to identify and interrupt biases more naturally, more quickly moving forward.
That's a great point, Brittany. Slowing down is something that you have to force. I know that's something that I've worked on here with the team specifically at the park. But the idea that when you're looking at talent, the one thing that I always try and keep in mind, and I impress on our team here now, I worked for Apple for 4 years. And so it was an amazing and very enlightening experience. And that at a certain level, there isn't enough diversity, but at a certain level and below, the diversity is unreal and really breathtaking. But this idea that not only are you seeking someone to fill a position, but also this idea that they're seeking someplace as well. And how do you find that sweet spot in the middle to make sure that what they need is as valuable as what the organization needs? Harder to act on, but really important to keep front of mind through the interviewing process. So we've talked a little bit about how we attract and select. Let's shift over to how we engage diverse talent. So now we have a diverse talent pool, or a diverse team pool. Let's talk about what that looks like. So how do you, here's a good one. How do you address or refer to your employees? And this one is really speaking specifically to that pronoun question. So any thoughts around that?
Generally speaking, I take that very specific concepts like that back to the general principle of inclusiveness. How are you enabling your colleagues and your workforce to identify the way that they want to identify, bring their whole self to work? All of these very related considerations. And one way is to set the standard. So make it something that everybody does. At Littler last year, I believe, we rolled out our pronoun initiative, where they put in the default for our signature blocks, you can choose from a drop down. We have like a dozen different signatures that you can use, and a number of them now include the ability to state your pronouns within your signature block. And although there wasn't that many people saying they wanted this for their own purposes, we can adopt those practices to show the inclusiveness of our organization and really make it a safe space for others to bring that part of themselves to work, so that they feel empowered, that they are accepted and included and respected within the workplace. So generally just making it the norm, and then people feel more comfortable in acting accordingly.
Anyone else on that?
I'll add to that, Lisa. One thing that we did this year that we've done in prior years, but without as much intention, is a self-ID campaign. And I would really encourage employers to do this, employers of all size. We reached out to employees and we sent them a survey and asked them to identify based on gender, based on race, ethnicity, LGBTQ status, veteran status, and disability status. And because we're a federal contractor, we had to ask about vet status and disability status, but we didn't have to ask about anything else. And we didn't have to put much rigor behind the process of getting people to respond. but we didn't think that would be very helpful to our DEI work. And we really wanted to know what our employees really look like, because the self-identification process in our current systems is really inadequate. So we started a self-ID campaign with a video series called I Belong. Mimi Liu is the manager of diversity and inclusion at Sempra Energy. She's an incredible human being, and she led a team that put together videos, and we had officers come on and do just little home TV videos that said, you know, I'm a mom, I have a, daughter with a disability, and I belong, you know, just claiming their identity. And then they created a video and posted it for all employees. It's an internal only video, so I can't share it, but it's so touching. I think I've watched it 15 times. Half of those times I cried, and it really got people to come out. We're still calculating the responses because the window to respond is still open, but I would encourage people to do that. I think it's good to kind of know. You have to create some psychological safety, though, because you're asking people to identify in vulnerable ways that may make them feel subject to adverse employment action later on, right? The employment lawyer in me screams, don't do it! but the DEI professional in me knows it's absolutely the right thing to do. And companies like Google, for example, have had fabulous results with their campaigns. So I would encourage employers to do that.
I love that idea.
I want to compliment Dawn on that. I think that's such a great idea. You know, one of the things that another organization that I've been a part of is we've given opportunity to employees to put on their badge how they'd like to be addressed, right? And making it public for everyone to see. So I think, you know, we have opportunities to still learn and do more in this area. And I love the way that you just make it open and inclusive for employees. Such a great idea. I belong.
That is a really neat idea. And video now, I think right now we're virtual and not face to face. That's becoming a more comfortable medium, I think, where it wasn't probably before. The thought of being on a camera and lots of people seeing it was not something that many people would enjoy. So now it feels like a norm. Vicki, were you going to say something?
No, I mean, we're not as fancy as the rest of you, but internally we refer to our employees as our AleSmith family. We call them Grand Crew members. Grand Crew is the acronym for all of our values, which includes respect and diversity and courage. And we constantly promote those. We have a reward and recognition program where employees can nominate each other when they exemplify our values. And it's nice to see they're constantly nominating each other, and they say, oh, I got a Grand Crew, somebody Grand Crewed me. And they earn points for all of these nominations that equal $1, and they turn them in whenever they want after a month or a year, and they can get merchandise from our gift shop. So I think people can see that we're very inclusive internally. I mean, we haven't done anything as fancy as the rest of you, although I'm very inspired by your ideas.
Well, I think there's some envy in being able to pull your levers and knobs very, very quickly. That's something that not a lot of people are afforded, and you get to see the fruits of your labors and your efforts almost immediately. And I think there's a lot to be said for that, Vicki. So how do you guys support or mentor employees around the idea of DEI?
I can take that one, Lisa. We have a diversity mentorship program called Empower that's been in existence for almost a decade. But last year we moved on to an online platform, the Insala platform, for that program so that we could increase the number of pairs that we could match. Last year we had 168 participants, and this year we were able to double that amount, even in COVID times. And what we're finding is that the virtual mentor relationship is probably the key to broadening the participation. So our aspirational goal is to hit 1,000 employees. We have 14,000 employees total today. So, and we pair based on unlike instead of like. So we try to we historically found people that were geographically close. We don't even need to do that anymore. So now we try to pick people across the family of companies and match them with someone who does something completely different than they do, who's, looks and thinks and works differently than they do, to help broaden their exposure and their networks. And participants really love that program.
That's amazing. What a great idea.
One of the things that we do at Sony is we have a program called Fast Forward, and it's made up of over 130 employees. And this is another really important piece that D&I, we absolutely need support from our leaders from the top down, but you really want it to be spread across the organization and the business. And this is a great example of where we have employees involved and engaged and mentoring one another. There's a couple of different tracks that are specifically focused on diversity, inclusion, and equity. And one is diversity and leadership. And so we're really looking at leaders within the organization and how to increase that pool of bench-ready leaders. And the second one is diverse communities of interest. And it's really highlighting and promoting and providing opportunities to our employee networks. And that is just those are two great ways where you're looking at individual leaders as well as the collective groups of employees and helping them mentor one another and develop within the organization as well.
I would say we do something pretty similar. So through our employee networks, we have both formal and informal mentoring. So like if you look at our Q Women organization, they have lean-in circles where they work together to kind of mentor each other and people in similar levels, kind of talk about, what some of their issues they're facing, and then how can they work together to get past those issues. But we also have kind of a formal vendor that we use. We use one called Leadership, and then the other one's called Athena Academy, that kind of works with mentorship from a more general leadership, perspective, skills, capability building. And then also what we do is with our executive committee, so our most senior leaders who report into our CEO, we give them specific plans every quarter. We come in, we revisit them. And at the beginning of the year, we talk about who are your top female employees, who are your top underrepresented population employees. And then we actually come up with, like, are you giving those people, opportunities to grow? Like what is your plan to actually grow the diverse leadership in your organization? And we actually work through it and make sure that they have development plans, make sure that they're meeting with their managers and having one-on-ones. And we've and through that, we're starting to see some changes. Like if you look at the number of people who have one-on-ones with their managers and who actually get promoted, that number goes up dramatically, as well as their engagement goes up, which leads to better productivity. So it's both kind of looking at the entire population through stuff like employee networks, but then also having that targeted programs for specific personnel.
Yeah, as you mentioned, Glenn, there are both informal and formal opportunities. Whether your organization has the formal opportunities or not, there's always opportunity for informal. When it comes to the mentors, I would say that there's so much value in just being an encouraging presence. Just your time and attention can be that. And then, of course, just the institutional knowledge you might have. You likely have spent more time in the field or the specific workforce. So just your insight on how you might navigate certain situations can have such an impact. And then when it comes to the mentee side, I would just say it can be very intimidating. There is an obvious power imbalance. And so that can lead to mentees being hesitant, but I want to explicitly tell all the mentees, own that relationship, take ownership of it, drive it, keep the check-ins going, be regular, get on their calendar. If they have expressed an interest in being your mentor in one way or another, they're going to very much appreciate that. So feel empowered to keep pushing it through.
It's a great opportunity, and I think that's great advice for really owning it. I think we have time for one more question, and then we'll take some questions from our audience. How do you create safe space for dialogue around differences? Is there anything specific that you could recommend?
I will share an example from Sony. When a lot of this happened early in the spring, we really wanted to open up the forum to employees to let them know that the organization, senior leadership, was concerned about them, saw what was going on, and wanted to hear from them. And so we had company-wide conversations where we had executive leaders speak. Mike Fasulo, our president and COO, spoke on the line, as well as Shaka Johnson, our associate general counsel, and I facilitated as well. And that was to share personal experiences, but also to hear from employees. And that was such a powerful thing, was just opening up that forum and providing a safe space and letting employees share what was going on with them. Afterwards, I did a survey, just about 5 short questions, and had an over 90% response rate on the survey. And 100% of the people who participated said that they found it valuable. They were glad that they did it. They would recommend it for others. So really providing that open forum. The second thing that we did was to give a toolkit to managers so they could have those small group conversations as well, because we all know that that relationship with your manager is so, so important. And I think it was Glenn that mentioned it a moment ago about one-on-one conversations. That manager relationship, whether it's with the team or an individual, was really critical. So we wanted to enable our managers to provide them with the tools to have those same meaningful conversations with employees.
That's a great idea. Really great. Anyone else have thoughts on that and how they're tackling that?
I do, Lisa. We took a very similar approach to that of Sony's. We held 8 community conversations across the family of companies. Employees could call in. We used Microsoft Teams so they could post questions anonymously without fear of retaliation or retribution. And we had employees at all levels of the organization speak to their personal experiences on those calls. And then we held a series of, I think, more than 40 department level community conversations across the enterprise as well, so that we would hit the group of employees who wouldn't necessarily call in to the optional community conversations. And that's where you really can put your finger on the pulse of where your employees sit. And that's where you have to come face to face with that pretty vocal minority of employees who will not be converted to allies, who really oppose the company's efforts in the DEI space, and it really causes you to have some crucial conversations with your leadership team about where you stand and what you're willing to do about it, and who you are as a company. And that's what employees and prospective employees want from employers these days. So it's important to have the spine and the fortitude to have those difficult conversations, for sure.
That's such a great point, Dawn.
I think those are great, absolutely great macro points. Just want to bring a micro point into it, more of just my experience that was very impactful for me this year. I had a baby during the pandemic, and so I came back to an entirely new world, wondering how I would be juggling working from home with a very young child, and all of the constraints on my time, all of the deadlines and the Zoom calls and all of that. And I was overly concerned with trying to make it look like nothing was going on. This was business as usual, and how I might go about scheduling my day with all of these different considerations. And I was with a colleague on the phone. We were trying to schedule a follow-up meeting, and I proposed a time, and he said, "No, I can't do that time. I make dinner for my kids at that time." I just thought it was so amazing to lead by example, bring that vulnerability to just show this is an okay consideration. This is what we're going to operate within. I hope that you respect my needs, the things that I need to do outside of work, outside of my job responsibilities, and it showed me that I would receive the same in return. So just being willing to spend those few extra seconds to maybe explain a little bit more background, give some insight into what you're dealing with, show that you care and respect about the very same things from your colleagues.
I have to say thank you, Brittany, for sharing that. That was super powerful, and congratulations.
Yes.
I think she brings up a huge point, which is being willing to be vulnerable with one another is absolutely more powerful than even you can say. Thank you for sharing that.
Thank you, Brittany. That was amazing. I can say my kids are grown, so I was a working mom, and it was difficult because things like that it wasn't the same. And so I'm glad to know that we're evolving and that we're getting better, and that we're thinking about how we're connected, and the balance that an employee needs to really be the most productive and to be able to bring their complete being to work every day, to give it their all. So that's amazing.
Absolutely.
So I just wanted to add one thing that we did here around, as everything was unfolding earlier this spring, and that was we did listening circles. And it was something, so Paul Barabalt is our new CEO. He's been on board for it was just a year on November 1st. And so we needed to respond, and we were trying to figure out as a leadership team, so I'm a member of the executive team, how do we do that? And so we had listening circles, and we did it with each group. So each executive team has the team that they work with, and we made it mandatory. And that was not the most popular decision. We got some feedback on that. But what was interesting, and we definitely have those folks that are going to resist, and it's not a space they're comfortable in, and that's okay. We'll figure that part out. But what was interesting is some of the vulnerability and some of the stories that we heard. And we did it in most cases on Zoom because some of the teams were just too big. We couldn't safely be in the same room together with distance. And it was amazing to me watching my team on a screen and seeing their responses to one another and how they fed off of each other's stories, and some of the biases that I had no idea. Like I had no idea some of these stories that came up, and some of them filled my heart and some of them broke my heart. But how they were with each other after all of this. We do a leadership huddle every morning that's distanced in a really big space here at the park. And watching them after those listening circles was really pretty breathtaking for me. And then that gave us the foundation for the work that we're doing now. And so I'm on that task force that works around this work at our organization, and then is also working with our new director when that person is hired. And so it was a little bit disheartening, to Dawn's point about those folks that are resistant, but for the most part, my heart grew in those listening circles. And I think that it changed our team in a way that nothing else could have. So I applaud everybody who's trying to just keep pushing that forward, because that's really how we're going to get this work done. So I would love to share some questions. I'm looking at my screen, you guys. We got a really good one. It's for those who have a D&I council, how are your members selected? Are they self-selected, nominated, or voluntold? So can you talk a little bit about how that works?
Yes, a little bit of all of the above, to be honest. We do have a leadership and equity council, and we had leaders who actually stepped forward to volunteer to be part of that organization. And then some leaders we tapped who led certain parts of the business, but everybody who is on it really wanted to do it, to be part of it, and to make a difference and to help drive the change in the conversation and to really move the needle. So I'm thrilled about the equality and council that we have at Sony.
Anyone else on their councils or what they have in place?
We actually have two in place. So we have kind of like a DEI council made up of EN leaders, and those are selected by the employees. And then we have another DEI council, which is senior executives, and those are selected because of the position that they're in. So for the various business lines, they have to have one senior leader, be a part of that. So I guess kind of like Lee said, it's like a mixture We have some that are self-selected and then some that are appointed.
Do they sit on the in that position for a specific amount of time? Like how do you roll people on and off?
Yeah, so at least for our EN council, the longest that you could be in that leadership position is 2 years. So at the longest that they can actually be on the DEI council is also 2 years, because once they get out of that position, then they're not eligible to be nominated for the council. And then similarly, you know, with the senior executive, you can actually like stay on for a longer period of time, because truthfully, we actually want people to be there for a longer period of time, because then they get more knowledge, they get more experience, and they're actually more helpful. So normally, like they're in that position until they kind of decide to move on. And I would say on average about 3 to 4 years.
4 years. Okay.
Yeah.
Anyone else on their D&I councils?
Councils are all voluntary, so people reach out and sign up, and even the executive councils are voluntary.
Ours are also voluntary. It can be a little bit tricky because there is so much interest. We don't have any concrete rules on who should roll off and when, which can be a little bit uncomfortable, because you don't want to tell people that are genuinely interested and dedicated to this to roll off, but really sometimes that is for the benefit of the greater good. We had a consultant a couple years ago that came in and said we really needed to shrink the size of our council because there wasn't enough ownership going around. There were too many voices in the room, and we really became more efficient when we did follow that advice, and we're more intentional about who can be included and for how long, and just sort of reestablishing an expectation that, you know, we value your contributions. Thank you so much for caring. But in order to continue onward and upward, we are going to have people roll off. So it's a little bit tricky, but definitely manageable.
All right, thanks you guys. Okay, so here's another good one. It's a multi-layered question. Do you feel the attention and efforts towards employee D&I needs also extend towards your supplier diversity? Should employers be reviewing their contractors and vendors, placing similar efforts to support and impact the diversity of their suppliers?
Yeah, so.
Oh, go ahead.
No, go ahead, Don, please go.
I was going to say we've had a little bit of a cheat or a leg up on this one because we're highly regulated by the California Public Utilities Commission, and they have set aspirational goals for us of 25%, I believe it is, for supplier diversity through a general order. But our companies have for more than a decade far exceeded those goals. So we have a very robust supplier diversity department and focus, and it precedes our D&I efforts, which are 20 years old. So it's pretty remarkable. They've had great successes, and I think it's one of sort of the hallmarks of our success in this space. So yeah, my answer would be absolutely.
Yeah, so I guess that we're very similar to you, Don. We've actually had a cheat as well, because some of the people who we supply to, so like Verizon and Microsoft, they actually have a 2-level supplier diversity program. So they look at who supplies them, and then they say, you also have to be supplied, you also have to have diverse suppliers as well. So we have been doing that for a while as well. And I will say that now we're also starting to get into that, who is supplying our suppliers. So once again, we're taking best practices of some of what other companies are actually doing to see if we could go like that next level down and actually track and monitor now.
You're on mute.
Darn it. We also have a diversity supplier program at Sony, and I absolutely believe that, diversity is an economic issue, so the two are interrelated. We've been working with the San Diego Black Chamber of Commerce and our minority supplier site. We can send it out to make sure that folks have access to it. It's very important.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
I often see the opposite side of this situation that we're talking about. As a law firm, we are partnering with various organizations that have their own standards for diversity and the representation that we might have. There was movement decades ago in requiring law firms to have diverse teams that are then put forward to the client and then that work on various matters. And just a recent trend to just keep our eyes open about, there's always the ability to improve and change what we're doing. And even though the issue was being addressed by having it a factor of consideration, ultimately, there is more of an issue now. The focus now is not on, is your team diverse, but more, who's getting the credit and is that person diverse? So a lot of clients have actually been taking steps to require and have input on who gets credit within the law firm to further address where the imbalance and the underrepresentation has been historically, so that we're renormalizing what can and should happen.
I can relate to that, Brittany. At Sempra, the law department has adopted a financial strategy for outside counsel. We've negotiated certain rate reductions, and we are paying back some amount of those rate reductions based on your performance in this space. So if you provide us with a diverse team, you get a certain incentive. If you come from a firm that's very diverse, there's another incentive. And if you have leadership that's diverse in a majority-owned firm, there's another incentive. So we're kind of putting our money where our mouth is, and I'm really curious to see how that all pans out.
That's fantastic.
So our next question, how have you addressed the issues that working parents are dealing with, especially women who are affected most when they cannot find available, affordable care?
We've put a lot of additional benefits in place at Sony, given what's taken place. We've had expanded care for some of our programs that offer daycare assistance. We've also really underlined our flexibility policies to say that we've always had a flexible work environment, and that's even more important to remember and embrace and utilize now. We're also looking at some extended flexible scheduling options, which we plan to announce later. We've had in place for some time things that we call Flex Fridays. So Fridays, everybody ends at 3 o'clock, and summer Fridays, everybody ends at 1 o'clock. And we've also put in other holidays. For example, we took Election Day. We made it a company holiday in the US to ensure that employees had the opportunity to get out and vote if they didn't do mail-in voting. So there were no barriers to prohibit that. So we're really looking at our flexible policies to ensure that we're doing everything possible to make sure that employees understand and really enable managers to act in ways that support employees as well.
Yeah, I really agree with what Lee said. We're doing the exact same thing, tapping into our flexibility program, Workplace Flex. If you are looking for care, we actually provide a certain number of days of care, even for like in-home care. So if you have somebody actually come to your home to take care of your child, we'll actually pay for that up to a certain limit. We have unlimited vacation days. So as long as you and your manager are okay with it, you can take vacation, or we have leave available. We also have we're having on December 4th is a mandatory mental health day. So we're actually closing down our facilities. So a lot of people, they have unlimited vacation, but then they don't take it. So it's like, okay, so we're going to close down the facilities, and now you have to take it, like no matter what. And then I would say lastly, there are going to be women who are affected by this, no matter what. Unfortunately, in our society, women have more of the domestic duties, even still to this day. So we also have pathways to come back into the workforce. So we have a returnship program. In tech, it's really hard for women to get back into, or anybody to get back into tech once you take a few years off, because now all of a sudden now you don't know the technology. But with Qualcomm and our returnship program, you have to be out of tech for at least a year. And then if you're out for like a few years, we'll bring you back in and then ramp you up for 3 or 4 months, teach you some of the new technology, and then hire you, back in full time. So once again, give you opportunity to make sure this is right for you. But then also we don't have to just throw you into the deep end and then you don't do well. And then now all of a sudden it's like, why, what happened? Well, it's because we didn't actually give you the tools to do well. So that's a few of the things that we're doing.
That's amazing. Especially for women, because like you said, we're still at it's just different when we approach a work-life balance and navigating families and things. So, okay, so we're going to start to bring it to a close. But I would like to ask one thing of each of you guys, and I would like to know your best piece of advice in making a culture that is more inclusive.
One thing that I will share is that we talked about it coming from the top and having executive support, but you really need to be able to show the business connection, how this adds value for your organization from a talent perspective and from a bottom line perspective, how having those diverse perspectives, those diverse ways of thinking and ideas provides value from an innovation standpoint, from a creativity standpoint. So making the connection to the business, showing that you're going to have diverse marketing, so you're going to reach new customers and clients. Those two pieces, leadership from the top and building into the business in order to create that inclusive culture.
Thanks, Lee.
Yeah, at least for me, as I kind of said before, listening, really hearing what your employees need, hearing what your managers need. How can you actually train them, provide for them, give them what they need. Really being open and attentive and making sure you're the type of leader that really cares.
Oh my goodness, we lost Glenn. I'm not sure what happened there.
You want me to jump in, Lisa?
Yeah, please.
Okay.
Hopefully he comes back. He was in the middle of a good thought.
Yeah, he was. I would just encourage everyone to do what you can where you are with what you have. And so if that looks like showing up to your next staff meeting with a diversity and inclusion moment, maybe that's what works for you. If it's joining one of the employee councils in your company or creating a new one, make that play. I think that it's really important for us to emphasize that every person in our companies is a steward of inclusion. And I think that there are ways you can ensure that that happens, like including that on performance reviews as one of the criteria for success, similar to what we do with safety. Every company's hyper-focused on safety and zero OSHA recordables, but we're not as focused on how many complaints of harassment and discrimination we receive, and we should be.
Great point.
I just have to add on to that. I know I went already, Lisa, but that accountability piece is so important, right? And we have made it a goal for our people managers to engage specifically in diversity and inclusion. We know as leaders what matters gets measured and what measures get mattered. So, right? So building that piece of accountability into D&I is also very important.
It's a great point.
All very good points from everyone. Just to add to that, something that we do is we really, besides listening, is we really try to encourage that open door policy, because not everyone's comfortable coming forward and speaking their minds and sharing their opinions. So we make it easy for them. We have HR and executive roundtables. We approach them. Every employee has access to my cell phone number, my HR person's number, executive numbers, but we really try to encourage them to come to us. And a phrase that I've used with our employees and leaders, literally in front of all of them at our all hands meetings, is when we emphasize the open door policy, I say no silent suffering. And that means no silent wondering, no silent confusion, no silent doubting. and go through examples to just really emphasize that open door policy, because sometimes we all think we know what we're doing. We think we're doing the right thing, and we can't read people's minds. So getting employees to come forward and share their input and their feedback to us is really important.
I love that. No silent suffering. I may have to borrow that one from you, Vicki.
It's okay.
Brittany, you want to bring us home?
Absolutely. I've mentioned it before, but just to really invest the time in yourself, to be intentional and think critically about your thought process, decision making, the systems that you have. And along those lines, I'll share something that my father used to always tell me that I will be passing on to my children, and that is to answer the questions and to question the answers. Don't just take it for what it is, but really bring that intentionality to everything you do. It's all an opportunity for us. And I have some little guys that want to say hi.
For anybody who has kids at home,
Yes, I asked.
this is your
you to
opportunity.
share your son on. Oh, they're so cute. Oh my God. Thank you for sharing. Oh, look. Brittany, you are awesome.
Darling.
So
Thank
cool.
you.
Lee, we want to see your son too.
He's downstairs online. So I've got 5 11-year-olds downstairs in a learning pod. Fortunately, I don't hear them, so maybe they're actually learning something.
Thank you so much. I don't know what happened to Glenn, but I have to thank all of you so much. Lisa, you did a fabulous job moderating. I actually learned a lot today, and I took a lot of notes. So I appreciate the time you took. Sometimes we just can't put a dollar value on time and support. And I just want you to know you're all rock stars, and I appreciate what you gave us. And let's not let the conversation stop here. Let's keep the conversation going and try and bring in as many of our business people and employees and leaders as we can, and keep the conversation going. So thank you, everybody, for joining us today, and have a great Thanksgiving and holiday season.
Bye, everybody.
We'll see you later.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
Deb.
Bye. Thank you all.